The first thing that hit Everett Hart as he stepped into the lecture hall was the sharp smell of sterilized metal and something floral and synthetic. The walls shimmered faintly with embedded screens showing rotating cellular models, equations, and a looping welcome message in 7 languages. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, and every alien eye in the room turned toward him. He gave a small nod, clutching his datapad tighter. "Morning." A few murmurs rippled through the seats, some in languages he didn't understand, others just clicks or vibrations. Everett spotted the only other human in the program, a girl named Helena Whitlow, seated a few rows up. She gave him a quick wave, but didn't move from her spot, surrounded by what Everett assumed were Sundari. They had skin like wet glass and no visible mouths, but somehow they were laughing at something she showed them on her tablet. Everett made his way to a corner seat, close to the emergency exit. His back ached from sleeping in the library again. He stretched, then opened his notes, scanning over bioplasmic protein synthesis and the absurdly complex metabolic loops of the Dracian physiology they were learning that week. Professor Escher, a lean, insectoid-looking being who floated more than walked, glided to the center of the room. "Today we begin practicals. You will be working in mixed teams. Humans will be paired with non-humans to ensure cross-biological compatibility assessments are understood." A few students shifted uncomfortably, some whispering. Everett noticed the Dracian 2 rows down staring at him. It had a long neck and pale blue skin that pulsed faintly with every breath. Its gaze didn't waver. If it had eyebrows, Everett would have said it was frowning. "Team pairings have been pre-selected," Escher continued. "Everett Hart and Solvex. Station 5. Solvex." The Dracian stood immediately. Everett sighed and grabbed his datapad before making his way to the front. Solvex didn't speak as they walked to the station. It simply observed him with a clinical interest that Everett found increasingly uncomfortable. They began the day's assigned task, mapping cross-species enzyme reactions in simulated blood plasma. Solvex took control of the interface while Everett prepped the reagent samples. For the first 20 minutes, they worked in silence. Then Solvex leaned toward him slightly, its voice low and musical. "You emit ultraviolet radiation from your ocular zones." Everett paused, holding a pipette midair. "Sorry? Your eye vessels. They are inflamed. Your sclera is hemorrhaging at microcapillary levels. That is a distress signal in Dracian biology. Are you dying?" Everett blinked. "Oh, no. I just didn't sleep." Solvex tilted its head. "Explain." "I pulled an all-nighter studying," Everett said with a tired grin. "Crammed half the textbook into my brain since midnight." Solvex recoiled half an inch. "You deprived your body of regenerative stasis. Voluntarily?" "Yeah," Everett said, chuckling. "Not ideal, but, deadlines." Solvex straightened. "This is not logical. Your species permits this." "Well, I wouldn't say permits. It's more like, we do it anyway." Several nearby students had turned to look now. A large, orange-skinned Korath barked something in its language, and the rest of its group began murmuring. One of them pointed at Everett's face. Escher floated over. "Is there an issue?" Solvex gestured toward Everett. "His ocular zones are signaling cellular breakdown. He claims to have induced this state by foregoing regenerative stasis in favor of academic pursuit." Escher looked at Everett closely. "You are injured?" "No, just tired," Everett said. "My eyes get red when I don't sleep. It's normal." "Well, not healthy normal, but human normal." Escher turned slowly, addressing the class. "It appears we must clarify. Human ocular redness is not an immediate sign of internal rupture. It may indicate fatigue. Human biology is unusually tolerant of short-term deprivation." The class buzzed with whispers. Everett scratched the back of his head. "Didn't think red eyes would cause a panic." Solvex leaned in again. "You are certain you are not dying?" "Not today," Everett said. "Though if I fail this lab, I might wish I were." Later that afternoon, Everett collapsed into a seat in the atrium. He had a sandwich from the Earth kiosk barely touched. Helena walked past and dropped into the seat beside him. "You okay?" she asked. "I started a minor panic because of my eyeballs." "I heard," she said, stifling a grin. Solvex reported you to Escher as a potential biohazard. Great, Everett groaned. Exactly the kind of attention I wanted. Next time, get some sleep, Hart? He nodded. I wanted to. Just got caught up in the notes. Helena pulled out her tablet and showed him a screen. You know there's a summary module for that chapter? Everett stared blankly. You're kidding. Nope. It's in the resources folder. Could have saved you about 7 hours. He dropped his head into his hands. I hate everything. Welcome to the intergalactic medical exchange, Helena said. Where Earth students burn themselves out and everyone else thinks blinking weird is a terminal disease. The next day, Everett arrived early. He had slept not well, but enough. His eyes were still red, though fading. Solvex was already at their station, reviewing data. You have stabilized your ocular state, Solvex noted. Mostly, Everett said. Still a little bloodshot. Solvex looked at him for a long time. Your adaptability is disconcerting. I'll take that as a compliment. They continued their work and the tension from the day before seemed to melt. Solvex asked more questions now about caffeine, stress, even human coping mechanisms. Everett found himself answering with more care, trying to bridge the gap between their perspectives. Midway through the week, during a group simulation on emergency trauma response, Everett had a minor accident. He slipped on a spilled reagent and landed badly on his left wrist. He hissed in pain as he stood, cradling his arm. Escher moved quickly. Remain still. I'm fine, Everett began, wincing. Unacceptable. You may have fractured a radial component. I can move my fingers. It's probably just a sprain. You will report to medbay now. Everett didn't argue. The pain was sharp and getting worse. 2 hours and a scan later, he sat on a hospital bed with a brace around his wrist. Hairline fracture, the medic said. You'll need to limit use for a few weeks. No heavy lifting. Great, Everett muttered. How am I supposed to finish the physiology lab? You'll have assistance. The Dracian has already sent a request to support your tasks. Everett blinked. Solvex did that? Yes. It also submitted a report on environmental hazards in the simulation space and made 3 suggestions for improving interspecies safety protocols. Everett chuckled softly. Guess I made an impression. You did, though not the one you expected. The next day, Everett returned to class with his wrist in a brace. When he entered the room, a few aliens nodded at him. One of the Sundari even offered him a small glowing plant, which he accepted awkwardly. Solvex greeted him at the station. Is the fracture stable? Yeah. Just need time. Solvex tilted its head. Your physical structure is fragile. Yet you continue. Kind of have to. That's how we operate. Solvex turned back to the interface. I am beginning to understand why your species is classified as high resilience. Everett smiled faintly. We're stubborn. That's different from resilient. Regardless, Solvex said, you are. Interesting. Thanks. I think. As the day wore on, Everett noticed more aliens asking him questions about pain tolerance, sleep deprivation, emotional regulation. He answered as best he could, careful not to sound boastful. He didn't feel particularly strong. Just determined. That night, he sat in the library again, though this time he left by midnight. His wrist throbbed and his eyes were only faintly red. He passed a group of students in the hallway, 2 Korath, a Feline, and a human transfer from Brazil. They nodded at him as he passed. Back in his room, Everett looked in the mirror. His eyes were tired, yes, but not inflamed. Not alarming. Just human. He laughed quietly to himself. Pulled an all-nighter and caused an interstellar health scare. Nice going, Everett. He turned off the light and finally went to bed. Everett shifted on the padded stool, wrist braced and itching under the composite wrap. The lab's ambient temperature had been lowered since the Dracian incident involving heat-sensitive enzymes that had started bubbling mid-experiment, and now a low hum from the climate control system filled the room. He rubbed his forearm against his opposite elbow to warm up, glancing sidelong at Solvex, who was adjusting the input parameters on the protein scanner with one elongated finger. You ever get cold? Everett asked, watching his breath briefly fog in front of him. Solvex didn't look up. Cold is a relative sensory classification. My internal regulators maintain constant thermal operation. That's a no then. Everett exhaled, teeth chattering discreetly. Lucky you. The scanner beeped, displaying a sequence of results in colors Everett still hadn't fully deciphered. Solvex muttered something low in its native tongue, then tapped a control to recalibrate. You have fewer thermogenic glands than expected for a surface-dwelling mammal, Solvex said after a pause. Your species continues to confound. Everett leaned back, balancing on the edge of the stool. We make up for it with layers. And a deep, unwavering commitment to stubbornness. You should see us in January. I have reviewed footage of Earth's seasonal cycles. The concept of recreational exposure to sub-zero environments is irrational. Snowball fights are a rite of passage where I'm from. Solvex turned to him, blinking both sets of eyelids. You voluntarily engage in aggressive behavior using frozen particulate matter. Everett looked at the scanner, then back at Solvex. When you say it like that, it sounds worse than it is. The lab instructor, a bulbous, multi-limbed being named Zari, who rarely moved from its elevated platform, announced the next sequence's parameters. They were to simulate a cross-reactive immune response using hybridized plasma samples, which, according to Zari, had a non-negligible risk of triggering temporary neuromotor confusion in species lacking a redundant synaptic buffer zone. Everett raised a hand halfway. That's not us, right? Human neural architecture lacks a secondary buffer, Solvex said without looking up. You are at statistically elevated risk. Everett dropped his hand. Great. They began the test. Solvex handled the plasma calibration while Everett inserted the microfilament probes, careful not to twist his wrist too much. After a minute, the screen flickered and the readouts began to scroll. Then Everett's fingers twitched. He looked down. His pinky had jerked sideways, entirely unprompted. Then it did it again. Hey, he said quietly, is that the neuromotor thing kicking in? Solvex leaned in, eyes narrowing. Describe your symptoms. My hand's moving on its own. Just the pinky. It's like it's got a mind of its own. Solvex immediately deactivated the probe. Cease all manipulation. Remove yourself from the interface. I'm trying, Everett muttered as his ring finger joined the rebellion. They're not listening. By now, 2 other teams had stopped working and were watching. Everett's fingers spasmed again, this time curling inward like he was about to play an invisible flute. Zari descended from its platform, its voice unusually high-pitched. Do not resist the involuntary impulses. Attempting to suppress them may intensify the neural misfiring. I'm not resisting, Everett's arm jerked, knocking over a vial. The liquid inside hissed against the floor tile and began to smoke faintly. Solvex moved quickly, sealing the spill with a neutralizing foam and guiding Everett toward the adjacent diagnostic chair. Sit. Do not flex your digits. I don't think I'm the one calling the shots right now, Everett said, settling into the chair as his left hand began tapping a rhythmic pattern on his thigh. Zari connected a sensor array to Everett's temple, then adjusted the frequency reader. Minor synaptic desynchronization. The effect is transient. Your cortical pathways are re-establishing dominance. You mean I'll stop playing drums with my kneecaps soon? Zari blinked slowly. Approximately 12 minutes. Everett nodded, letting his head fall back against the chair. Perfect. Just enough time to reflect on my life choices. Solvex loomed nearby, still watching his hand. You experience this with equanimity. Most species exhibit distress when motor control is compromised. Believe me, I'm not thrilled, Everett said. But also not the weirdest thing that's happened to me this week. Your tolerance for physiological irregularity is statistically anomalous. I'd be more worried if it was my dominant hand, Everett added. At least this one's on break already. Zari made a trilling sound and returned to the platform. The other students resumed their tasks, though a few kept glancing back. Are you permitted to engage in further activity today? Solvex asked. Depends, Everett said. Am I going to start moonwalking next? Solvex considered. Unlikely. Then I guess we're good to go. 30 minutes later, they resumed their simulation. Everett's hand had calmed, though it felt like it had run a marathon without him. They completed the immune mapping with minimal incident, and even Zari offered a rare beep of approval. As they packed up, Solvex turned to him. Your reaction to unintended neural stimuli was notably composed. I've had food poisoning with more drama, Everett replied. Once slept through a fire alarm. Human nervous systems are kind of like old routers, slow to crash, slower to reboot. Solvex stared at him for a moment. This is both alarming and commendable. They exited the lab together, stepping into the corridor where the station's artificial dusk lighting cast long blue shadows. Students filtered past, some reviewing notes, others chattering in bursts of overlapping dialects. "Have you ever required limb replacement?" Solvex asked as they walked. "Not personally. Though my uncle had a knee replacement. Titanium alloy. He could predict thunderstorms. Fascinating. We consider prosthetics only after full neurodisassociation. Yeah, we're a bit more proactive. If something breaks, we patch it. Duct tape and stubbornness." Solvex fell silent, then said, "This may explain the incident last cycle involving the human who sealed a decompression breach using nutritional paste." "That's real." Everett blinked. "I thought that was just a meme. I reviewed the footage. It was effective if unorthodox." They reached the station's central lift. Everett tapped the panel and the doors opened with a soft chime. They stepped inside. As the lift ascended, Solvex spoke again. "Does your species ever seek to reduce its exposure to injury?" Everett leaned against the wall. "We try. But the world or galaxy doesn't always cooperate. So we adapt. That's our thing." They stepped out at the residential level. The hallway smelled faintly of ozone and something vaguely citrus. A group of Thelene students passed them, nodding politely. Before heading to his room, Everett turned to Solvex. "Thanks for earlier. For not freaking out." Solvex tilted its head. "I evaluated the scenario and acted accordingly. Still, could have been worse. I could have started breakdancing involuntarily." Solvex paused. "What is breakdancing?" Everett grinned. "Oh, I'll show you. Once I can feel my fingers again." He walked off, shaking out his hand. That night, he sat on his bed with an ice pack resting on his wrist. He'd filed a report, written up his lab notes, and managed to eat something vaguely edible from the nutrition dispenser. He stared at the ceiling, feeling every muscle in his body remind him how long the day had been. From the desk, his tablet pinged softly. "A message from Helena. Heard about your hand's solo performance. You okay?" He typed back. "Still got all 5 fingers. Just not all 5 opinions." Outside, the stars flickered beyond the station's dome. He pulled the blanket over his shoulder, fingers curling naturally this time, and drifted off before he could worry about what tomorrow's lab might involve. Everett hissed as he pressed the cold compress to his wrist, which had swollen slightly again after he tried lifting a sample tray one-handed during a pathology module. The medical wrap itched like it had a personal vendetta, but he didn't dare take it off. He was already known as the ocular hemorrhage incident guy. He didn't need to become fracture re-aggravation guy too. He sat at a shared workbench in the diagnostics wing, where the stations were ringed with curved light panels and every surface was designed to self-sanitize. The scent of sterilization lingered in the air, a sharp, citrus metal tang that never fully left your nostrils. Around him, students prepped for the next segment of the interspecies diagnostic challenge. Across the table, Solvex arranged a set of diagnostic cells with care bordering on reverence. Its elongated digits moved in a smooth, practiced rhythm Everett couldn't help but admire. "Do you require assistance stabilizing your limb?" Solvex asked without looking up. Everett adjusted in his seat, trying to keep his wrist elevated. "Nah, I've got it. I mean, unless these things suddenly weigh 10 pounds each." "They do not. They weigh approximately 1.45 kilograms. Rhetorical, Solvex. Your idioms remain inconsistent with their literal equivalents." Everett snorted. "That's kind of the point." Helena passed by behind them, giving Everett a subtle nod before disappearing into the far side of the lab. Her section had been assigned to monitor organ decay simulations. He was glad for the separation. Last time she'd made a joke during a blood gas analysis. He'd nearly dropped a vial of simulated hemoglobin on his shoe. Zari's voice clicked through the intercom. "Begin phase 2. Simulated patients will be activated in 60 seconds. You are to identify and correct the presenting anomaly using only species-appropriate tools." A low hum filled the air as the diagnostic mannequins powered up. Everett's assigned unit, a humanoid rig modified to simulate Dracian biochemistry, twitched to life, displaying data streams on the adjacent panel. Cardiac rhythms irregular, Everett said, scanning the output. Looks like the second pulse chamber's misfiring. Solvex peered at the screen. Incorrect. Dracian's secondary rhythm fluctuates by design to redistribute metabolic output. This pattern is within expected tolerances. Everett frowned. But the oxygen saturation's dropping. That's not normal, right? Solvex leaned in closer. Correct. The saturation curve is deviating. Likely an error in hemolytic exchange. But the primary cell count's stable, Everett muttered, flicking through the data. Unless the delivery mechanism's impaired. The carrier proteins? Exactly. Everett pointed at the protein panel. See that dip? The binding sites aren't engaging. Something's disrupting their structure. Solvex tapped the screen. You deduced this rapidly. I used to get nosebleeds when my iron was low. My doctor explained it with cartoons, something about trucks not delivering packages. Your species routinely explains medical dysfunctions using cargo metaphors? Everett shrugged. We like visuals. Zari's voice came through again. 10 minutes remaining. Everett reached for the correction module with his good hand, maneuvering the injector tool toward the simulated vein port. The needle trembled slightly as he fought to keep it steady. Solvex reached out without a word and steadied his wrist. Everett paused. You know, this is the most literal lending a hand I've ever experienced. I am compensating for your biomechanical limitation. You are executing the mental portion adequately. High praise, Everett said, inserting the needle. The monitor beeped. Oxygen saturation levels began to rise. You've stabilized the patient, Solvex confirmed. Teamwork, Everett said, leaning back with a sigh. And mild wrist dependency. Zari floated past their station, one-eye stalk swiveling toward the monitor. Corrective intervention successful. Proceed to neurological scan. Everett winced. We're not done. Your species exhibits premature relief responses, Solvex observed. Yeah, we call that optimism. The neurological scan involved a different interface. Everett adjusted the sensor cap on the mannequin's head, glancing at the blinking lights on the neural array. The readings were erratic. Looks like interrupted synaptic transmission, he muttered. But the signals are firing. They're just not reaching the right regions. Solvex examined the data. This pattern suggests receptor desensitization. Possibly chemical interference. Everett scrolled through the simulated blood chemistry. Found it. Elevated trace of syntholine. That stuff messes with Dracian neurochemistry, right? Solvex nodded. It was banned in our home systems due to its destabilizing effect on pre-cortical processing. Everett initiated the simulated detox protocol, flushing the compound from the system. The neural patterns began to stabilize. Zari returned. Diagnostic complete. Efficiency score, 93%. Notable. Everett blinked. That's good. Acceptable for a species with monocranial processing and no redundant cortex. Solvex's head tilted. Impressive given your structural disadvantages. Thanks, Everett said. I think. The lab session ended shortly after. Students filtered out, murmuring in clusters. Everett remained seated, flexing his fingers. The swelling had gone down slightly, but the joint still felt like it had gravel in it. You performed competently, Solvex said, sorting the tools back into their compartments. High praise from a Dracian. I do not offer praise arbitrarily. Everett stood, stretching his back. You know, when I got into this exchange, I figured I'd spend most of my time trying to keep up. Turns out half of this program is just learning how to not get in your own way. Solvex paused, then said, you have demonstrated adaptability under physical constraint, corrected a misdiagnosis, and maintained operational focus despite discomfort. These are valuable traits. Pain tolerance and guesswork, Everett said. Basically my whole academic career. Solvex turned to him. Your species often frames achievement with self-deprecation. Why? It lowers expectations, Everett replied. Then when we actually succeed, it's a surprise. Solvex considered that. I will adjust my evaluative parameters accordingly. They walked together down the corridor. past the botanical wing where a few leafy specimens rustled under artificial sun lamps. Do directions use humor? Everett asked. We employ irony and inversion logic, primarily in juvenile socialization. So, no stand-up comedians? Not in your format. Though we do have a competitive storytelling ritual involving increasingly implausible medical errors. Everett grinned. That sounds familiar. They reached the shuttle node that led to the residential wing. Everett paused. You mind if I ask something? Solvex inclined its head. Why'd you volunteer to be paired with a human? Most of the others didn't seem thrilled. Solvex was quiet for a moment. I was curious. Your species is classified as biologically inefficient but unusually persistent. I wish to understand the paradox. And now, Solvex answered without hesitation. The paradox remains, but I have observed that inefficiency does not preclude effectiveness. Everett nodded slowly. I'll take that. They parted ways at the junction. Everett made his way back to his room, passing a few students carrying containers of nutrient gel and muttering about protein gradients. He unlocked his door, stepped inside, and dropped onto the bunk. His wrist throbbed, his back ached, and he had 3 more diagnostics to review before the next rotation. But for the first time in days, he didn't feel like he was drowning. He adjusted the brace, propped his tablet on his knees, and opened the simulation notes. The screen flickered briefly, then settled. Outside, the station lights dimmed to night cycle. Inside, Everett kept reading.